Tonight we have 3 stories, starting with a creepy story involving air vents and moving into tales of breaking down in the middle of the night. A huge thank you to the generous authors who have allowed me to share these stories with all of you. Please be sure to drop a like and comment if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. As children, me and my little brother would always race each other through the vents in our house to see who could get to their room faster. Dad would always tell us not to do it since one of us could get stuck, but we never believed him, so we just did it when he wasn't around. He was probably just getting tired of us always popping out of a vent and scaring him. I would win pretty much every time at first, but eventually I started having trouble moving in the tight spaces due to my growing body, while my brother would only get better and better until our roles had reversed, and suddenly he was the one always beating me. It wasn't that I was getting slower, quite the opposite, in fact. Something inside me said that if I moved too fast through the vents, I would eventually get stuck. So I stopped racing. This ticked my little brother off. "You're just mad because you're losing," he would shout. I ignored him and went up to my room. About after half an hour, my dad called and said that he was going to be late and to unload the dishwasher, and to get my little brother to help rake the leaves outside. It was pretty normal for my dad to be late, so I did as I was told without questioning it. It was only when I went to rake the leaves that I noticed something was wrong. 45 minutes had passed since I came home from school with my little brother, and yet I hadn't seen him since getting here. That wasn't normal. He was always bugging me to play with him or do something stupid that would get us in trouble, and I would always turn him down. Had he finally given up? No, it didn't seem like him. I assumed that something had happened at school that upset him, unless he was still mad at me about the vent thing, but that wouldn't make any sense. If it was me, he'd probably just try to punch me or something like that. It must have been something I didn't know about. I went up to his room, but he wasn't there. I searched the whole house but didn't find him anywhere. If he left, I probably would have heard the front door opening. I searched again, this time looking through each and every nook and cranny that he could be hiding in, all the while calling his name. I was about to give up and say he ran out when I wasn't paying attention, call the police. That's when I heard him crying. "Donnie, where are you?" No response. "Okay, come on out, Donnie. This isn't funny anymore." "I can't," he said between heavy sobs. I felt like I was talking to a ghost. Where the hell was he? And that's when it clicked. There was only one place I hadn't checked yet. The air vents. "Donnie, are you stuck in the air vent?" Through his whimpers, I managed to make out an uh-huh. Suddenly my mind was racing. My first thought was to call the police, but then it hit me. Dad doesn't know about the air vent racing. If he found out, he would never let it go. Heck, he probably wouldn't let us do anything by ourselves ever again. That left only one option. "Hang in there, Donnie. I'm coming to get you." "Okay." This was crazy, but what choice did I have? Grabbing a flashlight from my dad's toolbox, I forced my way into the basement's air vent. It was a tight squeeze. I had to ram my body against the sides of the vent in order to stretch it open enough for me to move easily. With the flashlight in my mouth, I started crawling through the vent like a mole, trying my hardest to follow my little brother's cries. They reverberated off the walls so much it was impossible to tell where they were coming from. Eventually I found that I had looped back around to the same place I started. This was getting nowhere. If my brother was trapped anywhere, it had to be the narrow part of the vent in the center of the house, near the boiler. I went there and shone my flashlight through, but saw nothing. Damn, where was he? I only had a little bit of a time before my dad came home, and then I would have to explain the whole thing to him. I tried calling out again. "Donnie, where are you?" "I don't know." "Great, thanks for the help, Donnie. What room are you closest to?" "I can't tell," he said. "Donnie, listen to the sound of my voice. What direction is it coming from?" "I can't tell." he said. Right, the reverberations. What about before, right before I came in here? Was I close or far away? You were close, I think. Really close. So he was near the basement. But that didn't make any sense. I already checked all the vents near the basement. He must have been in the upstairs shaft. I'm really sorry, big brother, he cried. I could hear his voice echoing from all around me. It was like he was talking to me from every direction. I wanted to crawl through the basement vent to your room so I could jump out and scare you, but then I got stuck. I just wanted to show you that I could crawl through the air vents with no problems. I'm so sorry. His wailing got louder. It was super annoying. Listen, Donnie, I'm gonna get you out of here, so stop crying, okay? He must have listened, because he calmed down a little after that. But at least he gave me an important clue. His destination. I retraced my steps through the vent back to the basement, following the dents I had made in the sides. Then I proceeded to crawl through the basement vent shaft towards my bedroom. Doing this brought back a lot of memories for me. But at the same time, I remembered why I had stopped. By the time I was on the other side, I was covered in bruises and cuts. And most importantly, I hadn't seen any sign of my little brother. It didn't make any sense. He knew the layout of the shaft better than I did. There was no way he would have gotten lost. I called down to him again. Donnie, what route were you using to get to my room? The shortest route, he said. That was the route I took. I couldn't have possibly missed him. The two of us couldn't even fit in any of the vent shafts together anyway. Was it possible that he knew a shorter route than I did? It seemed hard to believe, but there didn't appear to be very many other possibilities. Begrudgingly, I went back through the vent shaft, this time exploring every path that forked off from the one I believed to be the shortest. When I found myself back in the basement, I turned around to look again. This repeated multiple times, to the point where I even drew up a map to make sure I wasn't missing anything. He just wasn't anywhere. Of course, I hadn't considered the possibility that he might not actually be stuck. Instead, he was just lying to make me crawl through the vent a bunch of times as punishment for not racing him today. He could see my flashlight beam to know when to get out of the way in time, and since we had no other way of locating each other, he would be able to avoid me with ease. It was a far-fetched theory, but at this point, it was the only thing that made sense. Hey Donnie, stop being cruel. Just come out of there already. What do you mean? I can't move. His crying started up again, this time louder than ever. It didn't sound like he was lying. Eventually, Dad came home and I explained everything that had happened. He wasn't nearly as angry as I had expected, and he seemed to agree that my theory was the only possible explanation for everything. He went into his toolbox and grabbed a handsaw, then looked at me with a smirk. If he won't come out willingly, we'll just have to cut the vent open until he has nowhere left to hide. I wasn't sure if the property damage would be worth the little bit of revenge, but at the same time, my little brother could have left at any time he wanted. So at the end of the day, he was the one to blame for the damage that was about to be caused. We went down into the basement again, this time following the underside of the vent shaft to its first cross section. My dad placed the handsaw in the corner of the vent to start cutting. As soon as he made the first cut, everything went wrong. My little brother started squealing in pain, his voice echoing throughout the entire house. Blood poured down the saw and onto Dad's arm. He looked at me in horror and started shouting, "Quick, call an ambulance now." I rushed to the phone, but even as I was dialing the emergency number, I couldn't believe that I had searched so long for my little brother in those air vents and came up empty. Well, my dad was able to find him on his first try. The irony was too morbid to stomach. When I returned, I saw that my dad had tried making another cut in the vent to try to reach in and pull him out, only to be met with more blood and more screaming. The two cuts were far enough apart from each other that they couldn't possibly have both come from my little brother, unless he was moving. "Stop it, that hurts," he cried. My dad's solution to this was to simply start at the vent grate and keep cutting until he encountered more blood. But even by making a small cut at the entrance, he was met with blood and screams. It defied all common sense. His explanation was that the blood was coming from somewhere in the grate, and that cutting was causing the grate to rattle, which was agitating a wound my little brother had acquired at some point earlier. But I knew, and for a moment, I could have sworn the grate entrance looked like a face. Once the ambulances arrived, I was sent back up to my room. Not that it mattered. I could still hear everything from the vent in my room. No matter what room in the house I was in, I couldn't escape his cries. "I'm so thirsty." That's when it dawned on me. There was one thing I still hadn't tried yet. I ran down into the kitchen and filled a big salad bowl with water, and then carried it up to my room, being extra careful not to spill anything. I then poured the water down into the vent shaft. "Hey, Donnie, which way is the water coming from?" I listened closely for an answer, but received none. All I could hear were the sounds of someone drinking. Later that night, my grandparents came to pick me up and I started living at their house. After a couple of days, my dad started living there too. Our old house was quarantined off by the government for a long time, until it was eventually demolished and another house was built on top of it. Some old neighbors said that they took something away in a big semi-truck before demolishing the building, and there were a bunch of rumors at school about what had happened. As a teenager, I started having nightmares about my little brother being stuck in the air vents in my body, such as my respiratory system, digestive tract, or ear canals. It got to me so much that I started trying to destroy those air vents to make them go away. My dad and grandparents stopped me and I told them about the nightmares. They sent me to counseling, which I took until I was in my late 30s. When I was finally able to recover, I tried so hard to forget about this past event, but there was one thing that still bothered me. I couldn't work up the courage to ask my dad until he was already on his last legs. But the answer was one I knew from the beginning. "Dad, why didn't we ever have a funeral for Donnie?" He looked at me and smiled, weakly. "Donnie never died." I knew that already. I could still hear his cries. "You're not going to get it to start, Hank." Again, the car engine warbled. A useless sputter, and then nothing. I loosened my grip on the keys. My fingers hurt from wrenching them. "I guess you're right. Maybe a local can help us out." I took the keys out of the ignition and watched the headlights dim and their beams retreat from the deserted road. My wife, Matilda, sighed from the passenger side, her pregnant belly swelling under the seatbelt. Summer twilight lingered across the rural expanse in front of us. The tin roofs of silos glittered in the distance, all at least half a mile away. Croplands and pastures surrounded them on all sides. Lightning bugs were starting to flit amongst the tall grasses. Sitting on the far side of the road behind a fallow field was a matriarchal farmhouse whose windows shone dimly across the grass. I pointed to it. "They have their lights on. Do you think we could walk over there?" "We might as well. The last house we passed was 15 miles ago," Matilda said. She unclicked her seatbelt and opened the car door. Her belly hindered her momentum as she stumbled out. Wobbling like an ill-tempered duck, she braced herself on the car door. I dug my nails into the steering wheel. "Damn it," I muttered under my breath. We were supposed to be in Baltimore by 9. I'd never made such bad time in my life, let alone had the car battery die on me with my pregnant wife in the car. I opened the door and stepped into the grassy field. It didn't take us more than 5 minutes to reach the farmhouse from the car, but the time dragged as we fought through the crabgrass. It was silent except for the buzz of mosquitoes and quiet chirp of nighthawks. It was farmland in all directions. A few thickets of trees dividing properties, but we were surrounded by green and a skyline of silos. I could see a brown barn in the distance, the kind one expects to see behind a herd of Jersey cows, but the pasture was empty. There was no indication of life in this place except for the drone of insects, and the kitchen lights on in the farmhouse ahead of us. Although it had been a dry summer, the field squished beneath me with each step. Moisture pooled into my sneakers as I walked through the field. Matilda teetered along behind me. I stepped onto the rickety porch of the farmhouse and peered in. Shadows danced around the kitchen of the house, but there were no sounds that promised anyone was home. I knocked on the door, glancing at Matilda for any sign of validation. All I saw were her eyebrows raised skeptically. Her arms were crossed. A squat, sturdy woman opened the door. Mid-50s. She wore green rubber boots and a flannel shirt pulled taut across her breasts and stomach. A few wiry gray hairs protruded from her cropped hair. Her eyes were sharp, although hidden under her soft creases of skin, and there were specks of dirt in her eyebrows. It occurred to me that she looked like blonde Ina Garten, except more likely to host a gun show than a cooking program. "We're sorry to bother you so late, ma'am," I started, peeping in to see if we had interrupted dinner. The woman looked on-phased, so I continued. "Unfortunately, our car broke down and we were hoping we could use your phone." The woman smiled faintly. "No use," she proclaimed rather loudly. It startled me. "The shop's closed for the night, but I can give you a tow in tomorrow morning after I finish with my crops." The woman glanced at Matilda. "In the meantime, why don't you come in? We were just in the middle of dinner." We followed the woman into the farmhouse. It was quaint. Hardwood floor and low, sloping ceilings. Antique milk pails and a collection of wooden pigs cluttered the bookshelf in the corner of the parlor. Framed cross-stitch samplers dotted the beige, peeling walls. It was a caricature, almost too indicative of rural living. The dining room wasn't much different. A long table ran the length of the room dressed in a stained lace table runner. Pillar candles stood lit in the center, and all 9 places were set with china, although only one seat was occupied. "This is my partner Bobby," the woman said, gesturing to the hunched figure at the table. Bobby seemed older, or at least significantly frailer. 2 bold gangles hung from her freckled and wrinkled wrists. Her face was narrow with a hooked nose that made her look bird-like and perpetually discouraged. Wisps of dyed red hair obscured her glasses. "Oh my, visitors," she chirped dully. The woman pulled out 2 chairs. "I'll get you 2 some stew." We sat silently as they were served. Across from them, Bobby picked the gristle out of her meat with her thin, paper-skinned fingers. "It's a shame you broke down where you did," the woman said as she sat down next to her partner. "The town's only about 2 miles up the road. Not to worry, I can hitch up the truck tomorrow and tow you to the shop." "After you tend the crops, right?" I said. "Yeah, mid-afternoon I'd say. Maybe 3 or 4. Unless you folks got somewhere to be." Matilda and I exchanged glances. I was beginning to wonder how rude it would be to ask to use her phone to call AAA. "No," Matilda chimed in sweetly. "Any time is fine. We certainly appreciate it." That's it. We were stuck. I was going to have to settle in with them. I cleared my throat and pushed my dinner away from me discreetly. "So, what kind of crops do you grow here?" The woman looked at me sternly, her hospitable grin diminishing. "You'll see. I've got a very intricate farming system here. I get 300 pounds of peat moss and shagnum moss shipped in each month to maintain this crop. Really quite a state-of-the-art operation," she said with a curt nod and turned back to Matilda, smiling again. "And when are you due?" she asked, beaming at Matilda's belly. Matilda smiled back. "Next month. We were just up to visit my parents now that I'm finally on maternity leave." "How nice. You must be so excited. You know, before I bought this farm, I delivered a few babies myself." "She was a great doctor," Bobby added. "I was an obstetrician for 20 years. Definitely a burnout job, I'll tell you that. We moved out here for some peace and quiet. People out here were so grateful to have a doctor move into town," she said, turning her attention to the last morsel of the lifeless dinner in front of her. "They've been trying to repay me ever since," the woman said, chewing. She scraped stew off the sides of her bowl with a fork. "Well, we're certainly grateful you could take us in for the night. We thought we were stranded." said Matilda. Do you have a spare room? I cut in, slowly pushing out my chair. Of course, the woman replied. You two must be tired. I'll get it fixed for you. The spare room was sparse but comforting. A rusty window unit hummed in the corner. The bed was made with thick quilts and rooster designs. Matilda sighed and collapsed on the mattress. If we had just taken 11 to 83, we wouldn't be stuck here, she said. I thought cutting through would be faster, I said, perched on the bed frame. Plus, you can't take 11 all the way to 83. Yeah, whatever. I can't believe people out here still invite strangers into their house for the night. We could be psycho murderers for all they know. Maybe they just trust us because I'm pregnant. She reached down to unbutton her pants and sighed again. We should have just made my parents come down to visit us. I should be resting. Definitely not supposed to be traveling in the sticks, that's for sure. Matilda rolled over onto her stomach and plummeted her face into one of the quilted pillows. I laid my hand on her back. I know it's stressful. I mean, it's a stressful time regardless. Just think of how good it'll be when the baby is born. I waited for Matilda to respond as her spine rose up and down with her breath. Strands of her brown hair were splayed on the pillow. You're right, she finally said. Still stressful, but worth it. The window unit continued to hum. Matilda arched her back like a cat and rolled over. I ran my palms over the convex curves of her stomach and circled the swell of her belly button with my fingers. I leaned down next to her. She better tend those crops first thing, 'cause I can't wait to take you home, I whispered. My chin grazed the edge of her neck. Matilda chuckled softly and shook her head. What crops does she even have? I don't know, but apparently they require artificial bog conditions, I mocked. 300 pounds of peat moss, my ass. Turn the light off. I want to sleep. You don't want me to get the luggage from the car? No, I just want to sleep, she said. I stripped off my jeans and turned off the light. In the darkness, the thick summer air and the batting of the quilt made it feel like the countryside was closing in on me, smothering me. Spring peepers whirred in the night. The eerie calm of it was almost endearing. I woke up early the next morning. The sun was shining in pale yellow streaks when I got out of bed. Matilda was still asleep, curled up in the fetal position next to me. For courtesy's sake, I put my jeans back on and wandered downstairs into the kitchen. The lights were on and coffee dribbled out of the half-empty French press on the stove. I could sense both Bobby and the woman were already up, although the house was still. Quintuplets born in Austin, read a headline on the newspaper. Lying half-folded on the dining room table, I was fleetingly happy we were only having one baby. I picked the paper up and headed towards the screen door on the back of the kitchen. The mesh was caked with lint and the stench of mud. Through it, I could see into the back garden, which looked to be no more than an uneven layer of coppery dirt. It was no meadow, only a few sparse bunches of grass sprouted across the flat property. The woman stood several yards away with a shovel. She dug diligently with an unyielding pace. Behind her, someone sat on the ground. At first glance, I assumed it was Bobby, but her bare, muddy legs revealed her to be much younger. Her curved back and crossed arms made her look like she was doubled over with a stomach ache. She brushed strings of dark hair out of her face to unveil a cold, distant expression. I suddenly felt hands on my shoulders and jumped. It was Bobby. I see you've made yourself at home, she said, steering me back into the kitchen with her bird-like hands and intrepid stare. Wake your wife up, and we'll go to the diner for breakfast. The three of us walked a half-mile along the side of the road before we reached the diner. Matilda eyed me with resentment the whole walk, but her disappointment was palpable when we approached the building. Wooden and dilapidated, it looked more like an overgrown shed than any sort of establishment. Behind it stood a rusted playground with a dull yellow slide. The door had once been painted an unlikely coral pink shade, but now it was faded salmon and peeling, revealing gray splinters of wood underneath. The windows were stained and dusty. A "Sorry, we're closed" sign hung in one of them, having been neglected to be turned over. 6 or 7 locals ate inside the dimly lit diner at plastic tables. All of them stared at Matilda and I, seeming to smell our novelty. "This is a small town if I've ever seen one," I whispered to my wife. Bobby sat us near a window overlooking the playground. She took off her glasses and placed them on the table next to her. "Is there a menu we can look at?" Matilda asked. Bobby smiled dolefully. "No menu, dear. Get the egg breakfast." A young waitress greeted them. "Bobby, how good is it to see you?" She was youthful, pretty but tired looking. Her curly auburn hair was pulled back loosely in a braid. Her smile was warm but unsettling, both enthusiastic and weary. I figured she was probably in her early 20s. Bobby peered up at her. "And so good to see you, sweetie. How have you been?" "So much better since the operation," the waitress said. She looked about at us. "Can I get you all coffee, or maybe you're ready to order?" she asked meekly. "Oh yeah, we're ready," Bobby said. "I'll have the usual. They'll both have the egg platter." The waitress addressed Matilda first. "How do you like your eggs?" She swallowed. Her throat quivered. "Scrambled is fine," Matilda replied. "And I'll have mine sunny side up," I said. The waitress took our orders and left. It was silent except for the scratch of forks on plates and the opening and closing of jaws. I looked around the restaurant at the patrons. They were mostly women, some young and disheveled while others seemed old and worn like Bobby and the woman. Actually, they were all women. I noticed Matilda staring out at the playground. Filthy water dripped from the slide. "It's Saturday," Matilda said with a somber laugh. "Where are all the children?" Bobby looked at her with stern, even eyes. "There are no children in this town," she said. "Do you think she's ready to drive us into town yet? Would it be rude to ask?" Matilda asked. I looked at my watch. Its porcelain ticks droned on as it approached 4 o'clock. We'd been politely perched on the parlor couch reading gardening magazines all afternoon. I sighed. "Looks like it might rain soon. Maybe she'll call it in early." It was true. The sky was clouded and tinged an ominous green. Heavy, damp breezes blew through the screen door to the kitchen. I could see the woman digging in the front field. Flecks of dirt flew across the window. The ceiling cracked as Bobby walked around upstairs. Matilda dropped an issue of Better Homes and Gardens on the coffee table and started massaging her temples. "Matilda, could you come do me a favor?" Bobby croaked from downstairs. Matilda rolled her eyes and looked at me. "Coming," she called, feigning enthusiasm. "I'll go outside and ask," I whispered. I went out the kitchen door, which was swollen with humidity. In front of me, the woman stood waist deep in a hole. Her face and clothes were spattered with mud. Excuse me?" I said. "We were just wondering when you thought you'd be done here." The woman planted her shovel in the ground and climbed out of the hole. She walked up to me. "Sure," she cooed. "I'm nearly done. Where's your wife?" Her stare had an uncomfortable adamancy about it. "She's upstairs, with Bobby." The crow's feet around her eyes deepened as she smiled. "Good," she said, and reached out to put her hands on my shoulders. She nodded towards the shovel stuck in the ground. "Help me out and do some digging, won't you?" Her tone was sinister. Her words almost slurred like she knew something I didn't, but I was on to her. I felt flushed, nauseous almost. Sweat seemed to settle underneath my skin. I felt the hollow echo of the shovel falling to the ground as the woman went inside behind me. Why did she want me to help with digging? I knew. The women, the absence of children, the obstetrician, Matilda. It all fit together. It was the sweet, stinging stench of my abdomen that caused me to fall, the sharp sickness of things going wrong. I sank to my knees and felt the cool sod between my fingers. Suddenly, I was grabbing at fistfuls of dirt, tearing through the pile next to the hole the woman had been digging. The pit in my stomach grew into a gnawing, instinctual ache. As the dirt accumulated under my nails and I clawed deeper, the soil turned to an orange. God, what compelled me to keep digging? My fingers hovered on something soft and tender like an overripe pear. It was easily dislodged. I cradled it and brushed the dirt away from it. I saw a dark coil. It was like a brown periwinkle shell. I ran the length of it with my pinky. It was a cotchley. An ear, stained brown like leather skin of a lifeless doll. But it wasn't a doll. It was a child, an infant. Attached to the ear were fetal cheeks, shriveled eyelids, preserved limbs. I recoiled, my body tingling, ears ringing. The dirt had stained my hands the same rusty shade as the dead newborn. Screams came from the upstairs bedroom. The woman approached me from behind, putting her hand on my shoulder. The hot air of her breath billowed off my clammy scalp. "Do you know why there aren't any children in this town?" she whispered, spittle flying from her teeth. "Because I took them all, and they're still growing." The persistent creak of wood and leather, the crunch of dirt beneath the horses, and the light whispering of the wind in the pine needles overhead were the only sounds as the stage proceeded down the mountain road further into a seemingly endless range of jagged peaks, somewhere on the other side of which rested the city of San Francisco. They were still hundreds of miles away, crossing through a wilderness frightening in its purity, and a long ways from their starting point in Massachusetts. The oil lantern hanging dutifully alongside the wagon was the only illumination, and the stars above shone with a light of their own, dusting the sky like glass crushed into a fine powder, and then spread over a layer of tar. The driver was the only one awake, hunched in his fatigue, but holding the reins nonetheless. In the cabin was a man, dressed so elegantly that he seemed like a being extraterrestrial altogether in such an empty place. He wore a suit that one would expect to see in a ballroom. Yet out here there was no crowd of merry folk to dance with, no pianos filling the room with music, no wine. There was only the wind, bitter in its frigidity, and the trees, and the wolves. The wolves were the reason they were traveling at night instead of resting after the day's mileage. The woman, wife to the man, had been skittish after hearing the howling at dusk, and had insisted they left the camp once she had spotted a gleaming pair of eyes in the tree line. The driver, a man aged beyond his years by a rough life on the road in places, and even more hostile than this, had tried to explain to her that they were just curious beasts, and were too afraid of them and the fire to approach, but it had been in vain. She threatened to forfeit a third of his fare if they didn't pack up and leave immediately. Now they were both fast asleep, and relatively comfortable in the warmth of the cab, while he, a Tennessean by the name of Turk, was up top, fighting to stay awake and drawing his fur cloak tightly around his shoulders, while the breeze lapped at his exposed fingers like a hungry dog. He was not a bitter man, though, and indeed was no stranger to rough travel conditions, and he altogether didn't mind the weather or the lack of sleep much. It was something else he was afraid of, something he had noticed in the tree line several hours ago. Some faint shape or whisper of movement like a shadow out of some realm where the mind wanders and the lip jerks and drools. At dawn, he halted the carriage and dismounted, taking a moment to stretch his muscles, sore from countless hours driving the team of horses. They had paused in a clearing bordering a stony cliff overlooking a massive valley of countless pine and oak. He soaked in this view while he drained his bladder off the edge and listened to the birds chirping. On the way back, he was greeted by his passenger, a man who insisted Turk call him Thomas, but who he spoke to only as Mr. Wilkes. "Good morning, Turk," he said, yawning the sleepiness out. "Morning, Mr. Wilkes." "Why have we stopped?" the man's wife, Cheryl, asked, easing herself out as best as she could in her dress. "Mrs. Wilkes, if it's all the same to you, I need a few hours rest before we keep going," Turk answered, scratching his beard sheepishly. He wasn't a fan of speaking to this woman, but he had been raised to be polite, and she was paying a hefty purse for the trip, after all. "Let the man sleep," Tom said, his voice carrying a subtle edge to it. You kept him up the entire night, for Pete's sake. The city isn't getting any farther away. Cheryl said nothing to this, and instead went for the bushes, lifting her dress up to keep the expensive fabric as free of dust as possible. I'm grateful for it, sir. I only need a few hours and we'll be ready to go, Turk reassured. Take as long as you need. We do have a fairly excellent view to entertain ourselves with. Turk nodded and smiled and went back for his coach. The sea was a far cry from the silk sheets and soft pillows that the Wilks were used to, but it was an old friend for him, and had served as a suitable bed on many nights before. The animals were content to graze and rest for the time being, but Turk slept with the reins in hand anyway. An old habit he had been forced to learn after waking up to his wagon lurching forward many times after some wild animal had spooked the horses. He curled into the fetal position and was unconscious almost instantly. After a time, Cheryl made her way back from where she had done her business and found Tom smoking his pipe and looking out over the vale. She came up to him and stood at his side, not passing Turk and his coach a second glance. Sure is pretty, isn't it? She murmured, noticing for the first time the grand vistas to the east and the endless sea of green stretching beneath her. Tom said nothing at first, only thoughtfully inhaling from his pipe and gazing over the land. Finally he turned his head to her and spoke. It really has a power to it, huh? How do you mean? She asked, noting the tone of his voice. After growing up in the city, well, it feels free out here. And look at that. A man could drink this and like wine. Sure is pretty, she repeated. I wouldn't mind waking up to this every morning. What are you saying, Tom? I'm saying is, well, that clearing could fit a little house pretty well, don't you think? And a forest for the children to play in? He looked at her face, saw the incredulous look she was giving him, and hastened to add, just a thought is all. All of our money, our friends, are back east, she said. I know, honey, I know. I'm just a little drunk on the scenery is all. Would you sit with me? But my dress. Please. Tom, this is Chinese silk. We'll buy you a whole new dress the moment we get to San Francisco, honey. How about that? Chinese silk, Persian, whatever you want. And then we'll see the ocean from the other side of the country. How does that sound? I mean, well, all right. She relented. They sat down on the grass, and Tom slid his arm around her waist. They sat like that in silence for some time. Tom's offer to get all the sleep he needed was disregarded by his wife, Turk found, when she shook him awake a mere hour and a half later and urged him to keep moving. He sat up, blinking and rubbing his eyes, and felt more worn out than he had before. Still, he decided, the sooner they got to the city, the sooner he could be rid of them. And he'd have some money in his pocket, too. San Francisco was a good gambling town, and they also had good whiskey and decent women. Plus, although he didn't like admitting it to himself, he wanted to be out of the mountains as soon as possible. Some shadow crept in the back of his mind like the remnant of a nightmare, and he shivered a little bit as he urged the horses on with a crack of the reins. The morning passed eventfully. Soon the trees once again obscured the valley from sight. Turk snacked on biscuits as they went, and not long after noon they paused for a lunch of smoked venison and beans before continuing the journey once more. The sun reached its meridian, then passed it on the eventual decline to the west. Soon the sky was as pink as an orchid, the clouds a mellow purple, and the horizon to the west shrining in all the brilliance of blood. Turk halted the coach and dismounted, groaning as his legs straightened for the first time since sunrise, and knocked politely on the cab door. Mr. and Mrs. Wilks, it's about that time. Go ahead and make yourselves comfortable for the night, and I'll have supper ready soon. Oh, are we stopping already? Cheryl asked, bleary-eyed from a nap she had apparently been woken from. Afraid so, ma'am. It's getting nigh on to dark to see, and, if you don't mind me saying it, I'm pooped. Turk answered, holding the door for them. He helped her down, and then Tom followed suit. I'm going to hunt some firewood and maybe scrounge up something fresh to eat. I understand that dried deer meat gets a little tiresome after a while. Thank you, Turk, Tom said, leading his wife to a nice flat spot where he presumably would set up their tent. Turk grabbed his rifle from the storage box at the tail end of the stage and, holding it with one hand by the frame, sauntered off into the tree line. Firewood was a must, and not just for the freezing mountain temperatures, although those could be brutal even in the late spring. Tom immediately got busy setting up their sleeping area. He was only slightly better at pitching tents than he was when they had first set out several weeks ago. But in the end, he got the job done. Turk preferred to sleep under the stars, and although Tom partially admired his ruggedness, he also found it disconcerting. Cheryl, on the other hand, was appalled that someone could sleep on the ground like that with nothing but a blanket underneath. Tom found her repulsion of all travel conditions mildly irritating. But he had to admit that after a lifetime spent in Boston, it wasn't exactly ideal. He did dread the trip back, however. Weeks on the road again, without even the end goal of a new city to visit. Listening to nothing but her ceaseless complaining definitely did not excite him. Maybe they'd just stay in San Francisco forever, he thought. Maybe that'd be easier. Cheryl seemed to be brooding while Tom worked. She pouted silently the entire time, and even when the tent was finished, she did not enter it. He glanced at her, started to climb inside, then decided against it, and instead approached her. "Are you going to say what's bothering you, or are you going to come get warm?" he asked, placing his hand on her hip. "It's that driver," she mumbled. "Turk? What about him?" "He just doesn't understand. I don't like it out here. I want to be away from this place." "What would you have him do? Stay up all night again?" Her look told him that that was exactly what she wanted. "Look, honey," he started. "I understand that you're getting a little anxiety about being out in the wild like this." "It's not anxiety," she hissed suddenly. "There's something off about these mountains, and those howls at night." "I agree. Being eaten by wolves wouldn't be the ideal vacation." Tom laughed. She gave him a look suggesting that she didn't find it funny. "All right, listen. Turk's a good man, and he's got a rifle. And if that doesn't help, just remember that I'm here to protect us." Kissed her forehead gently. "Now will you come get warm in the tent with me until he gets a fire going?" Cheryl finally let out a smile. "All right, I suppose." The sun was finally disappearing behind the skyline when Turk emerged from the woods, carrying his fur cloak like a sack full of firewood. There was still suitable light in the sky to see fairly clearly, and he immediately got to work rousing a fire. Tom and Cheryl had pulled up logs as seats, and they sat watching until the flames from the tinder started licking at the branches on top and embers began to dance in the evening breeze. Turk fetched his cookware from the wagon, and soon they had stew bubbling over the fire. Somewhere, far in the distance, a wolf howled, and immediately after another one answered. Cheryl fidgeted nervously. "Hey," Turk said. "It's a lonely sound, but a welcome one sometimes. Sometimes it's nice to hear that you aren't the only living thing around." "Will they come up to our camp?" Cheryl asked nervously. "No, at least not until we're long gone. To chase our scraps. Wolves aren't evil beasts, ma'am. They can kill a man, sure, but it's rare. Most of the time they just like being left alone. It's people who can be evil. Humans are the only things God has ever made that will kill just for the sheer fun of it. I've seen things, traveling the lands as I have, things that would make a lovely lady like yourself ill." "Evil," he echoed. And Tom and Cheryl thought that he was still talking about people, but he wasn't. You also hear stories by traveling. Whether you're in a saloon or just sharing a fire and a meal with someone on a cold night, people talk, and I don't misdoubt, but what they stretch the truth a bit. But you hear things that'll make your blood run cold as ice until it curdles up in your veins. Things not of this world, or perhaps that only lurks in the darkest corners of it." He stood and hunched over the flame and stirred the pot before sitting back down. "Mrs. Wilkes," he said, "if it's all the same to you, I'd like to not travel by night anymore. I don't think that's what's best." Both Tom and Cheryl were visibly shaken by what Turk had said. The darkness and quiet of the forest seemed to close in on them, and the rustle of the pine needles in the wind seemed to harbor a dark secret all of a sudden. "I didn't mean to scare you," Turk laughed, trying to lighten the mood. I apologize. My conversation skills need some improving, I'm afraid. What stories have you heard? Cheryl asked. Oh, don't fret about it, Turk said. Come, grab a plate of stew, ma'am. You too, Mr. Wilkes. We have a long road ahead of us, and you will need your strength. After supper, Tom and his wife retired to their tent. Turk grabbed his old wool blanket from the wagon and laid it out onto the ground, then set his bedroll down for a pillow and hunkered down. He didn't sleep, though, exhausted as he was. He lay there for quite some time watching the trees, watching them sway in the wind, listening. After a while, he got up and tossed more wood on the fire. In the morning, the three of them rose and quietly packed up to get back on the road. Turk had managed to get a few hours' rest, but he was still groggy as he folded his blanket back up and tossed it in the box with his bedroll. He noted that Tom was more adept at packing his tent and his belongings. He and his wife seemed at odds, though. They weren't speaking, and their interactions seemed stiff. Turk wanted to be out of the mountains by nightfall. There was something wrong, and the bright early sunshine didn't dilute it this time. He climbed into the driver's seat, itching to go, but Tom and his wife were whispering to each other now and weren't getting in. It seemed private and Turk didn't interfere, but eventually Tom came up to his side and asked, Do you mind if I ride with you for a while? I don't mind at all, Turk replied. Thank you, Tom said, climbing up onto the shotgun side. I just want to admire the scenery is all. Before we leave these mountains and the chance is lost. Turk felt that there was another reason, but he didn't press it. Instead, he cracked the reins and they were moving. Sure is a beautiful place, Turk soliloquized. The road's much smoother than I had expected to. Still, I'd be glad to be rid of this place. Not you too, Tom groaned. I could live here forever. Turk did not answer right away. For a while, the only sound was the steady creaking of the wheels, the breathing of the horses, the birds in the trees, and an occasional pebble being tossed aside under a hoof. The air felt less thin than it had the day before, and it seemed like it would be too long before they were back in level country. The feeling filled Turk with euphoria, optimism, and, he noted, a good deal of relief. He suddenly felt like talking to the prim city man beside him, who thus far had seemed more like some foreign entity rather than a fellow man. What is it you two want to see in San Francisco? He asked, keeping his eyes on the laboring horses ahead. What is there not to see? Tom said distractedly. It's a new place we haven't been to yet, and it's supposed to be an interesting experience. Pretty, sure, Turk said. Seeing the ocean, all that, looking over all that water, it really gives a man a sense of how big our world really is. We have oceans back home, too, Tom scoffed. I grew up beside the sea. I was talking of more, you know, culture. There's supposed to be a lot of exotic people there. Exotic, sure. There's a lot of Chinamen. But they're pretty much treated as the blacks were some years back. In the markets there you can find severed heads from Brazil, all shrunken and shipped over here, same as the ordinary goods. Severed heads? Is everyone out west a complete savage? I had hoped it was all just talk. Mr. Wilkes. Tom, man, just call me Tom. Tom, Turk said. It's like I was saying last night. You can find meanness anywhere you can find people, and you can find people just about anywheres. About last night, Tom began. Why do you have to go and spook my wife like that? She won't even talk to me now, just because I mentioned in passing that I'd like to stay in these mountains a while. All because you got her imagination running. Turk took a moment to think about a response that held no danger of irking the man. At last, he just spat it out bluntly. Mr. Wilkes, your wife is right to want to leave this place as quickly as possible. I myself am pretty eager to escape. Tom stared at him in surprise. You too? I thought you to be a reasonable man. You're not likely to be frightened of some poor living conditions. It isn't the mountains I dislike, nor the weather. I've lived through worse. I once survived a blizzard down in Utah by killing my horse and sleeping inside its belly. With all due respect, Mr. Wilkes, this is a bad place, and something else entire. The stories I've heard. Stories, Tom snorted. You believe in old wives' tales and campfire ghost stories. I'd expect that from my 3-year-old son, but not from you, Turk. Turk was about to reply when the team of horses snorted and stopped. Shying their heads and stamping their feet, Turk looked ahead and saw a massive gravel slide, maybe 50 feet across, covering the entire trail and at the edge of a cliff. As he watched, thousands of pounds of loose shale fell away on the edge of a great torrent. Turk cursed and yanked at the reins. He looked around for a detour, but to the right of the track was a steep berm atop which the tree line started, scarce thick enough to fit a man, let alone a stagecoach and a team of horses, and to the left was the cliff and its gut-wrenching drop. How do you suppose we go forward? Tom asked, a little too satisfied with the sudden obstacle. We cannot go back, Turk said, more to himself than his passenger. Not another night. What was that? Nothing, Turk said, waving the question off with his hand. We're going to go through. It should have settled enough to hold us, if we're careful. In truth, he had no idea at all whether they were about to plunge to their deaths or make it safely to the other side, but he was filled with a sudden, maddening desire to try. I don't, Tom began, but then changed his mind mid-sentence and shut his mouth. They started forward, the horses being careful of their own volition, and slowly moved onto the gravel patch. A few pebbles clattered away, off the edge and into oblivion. They pressed forward. Suddenly, the rear wheels began losing tread. The tail end of the wagon shifted left, towards the edge. Not a lot, but enough to almost cause a coronary for the unfortunate passengers. The horses nearly bolted. Turk had to hold the reins with all his might, forcing himself not to shout, lest the noise alone sent them off the brink. If the wagon had lurched forward at full speed like that, it surely would have inspired another landslide, and the city of San Francisco would have never noted their absence. By either luck or skill, Turk managed to keep the animals in check, and they cleared the gravel, inspiring a collective sigh of relief. I don't think Cheryl even knew what was happening. Tom laughed nervously. I say we keep it that way. Whatever you say, sir, Turk said. Inside, he was just as shaken as Tom, but he hid it better. The terrain on the other side did not improve much. What was before a nice, even, well-traveled road was now steeply sloped, rocky, uneven, littered with the roots of ancient trees. Clearly most other travelers did not brave the gravel slide and instead turned back to find another route, resulting in this portion of the road being much less developed. Shit, Turk muttered. His worst fears were now being realized. If conditions continued this way, they wouldn't even be close to leaving the mountain range by sundown. They proceeded on, at a fraction of their former speed. The horses struggled to negotiate the terrain, and Turk constantly worried a wheel would bust on a stone or a rut. Panic and desperation began to well up inside him, feelings he was not accustomed to. Stop being childish, he told himself. This greenhorn city slick was handling a simple wilderness better than a seasoned driver who had passed through dozens of similar places. Shame burned at his cheeks, but it did nothing to abate the disquiet in his chest. Night descended upon them as predictably it would, and Turk was forced to halt the exhausted horses when they found a small area suitable for a campsite. The trees here were dead, black and barren, the victims of some lightning strike or fires years past. It made the place resemble a cemetery, almost, or the scene of some ancient disaster. Black stakes protruded from the bed of brown needles. Even the sky was gray, laden with foreboding. Turk sat atop the seat even after the coach stopped moving, looking around with eyes that held no emotion. With twilight, the sense of danger grew, until it felt like a suffocating presence in the air itself. It bothered him that Tom couldn't feel what his own wife pretty much knew for certain. He had dismounted nonchalantly, and was calmly setting up camp. The air was cold, and the wind was stronger than usual, and smelled of rain. It made Tom's already clumsy attempts at setting up the tent even more unbearable to watch. Cheryl was asleep in the cab, and Turk hurried to find some wood before the sun went down too far to see. "God damn it," Tom yelled when a great gust of air, the strongest yet, caught the limp tent and sent it flying upwards until it tangled itself in the branches with no hope of retrieval. This woke his wife up, and she opened the coach door and stuck her head out to see what was going on. "Tom?" she asked, the anger in her voice betraying her outer calm. "Tom, what is that?" "It's..." He scratched the back of his neck sheepishly. "It's our tent, honey." Her jaw dropped, and she stormed out of the cab. "Well, it was an accident," he protested. "The wind..." She smacked him in the face. Hard. Afterwards, she glared at him and stormed off back to the cab. She was almost halfway back when he grabbed her arm and spun her around. "Quit acting like a fucking bitch," he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. His face was contorted into a mask of pure rage that she had never seen before, and suddenly she felt very weak in the knees. He raised his hand to hit her, but stopped. Then he let her go. She stood there, rubbing at the burning part of her arm, where his hand had twisted the flesh and sobbing. As she did so, the first drops of rain began falling. Turk was scooping up another log when he heard drops landing around him. He had been praying, fervently, that it would not rain, despite all evidence to the contrary, and his prayers went unanswered. He dropped a log from his hand and took his rifle with both hands, scanning the area around him. All he saw were dead trees, dead pine needles. It was quiet. He realized he could no longer hear the wind, and though he still felt it, puzzled, he listened more closely. That's when he heard it. Tom and Cheryl calling for him. "Turk, you didn't get lost, did you?" Tom was yelling. "It's cold. Come help us make a fire," Cheryl added. Turk rolled his eyes and started heading towards them with his meager supply of wood, and then suddenly halted mid-step. The voices were coming from a completely different direction than the camp was. "Oh no," he muttered under his breath. So the stories were true, it seemed. Even despite his fears the past few days, he had still doubted their authenticity. But now he couldn't lie to himself anymore. It was time to go back. As he ran, he noticed how dark it had gotten. He had been out much longer than he had thought. There was hardly any light left in the sky. His heart started beating faster. The rain started falling harder. There would be no fire in the rain, and there was no shelter under the husks of trees long dead. This was it, Turk knew. He broke through the tree line and into the camp. At first it seemed empty, but soon he spotted Tom and Cheryl hiding from the growing storm in the wagon. He sprinted to them, not caring how crazy he looked in that moment, and threw the door open before jumping inside. "Turk?" Cheryl asked, worry flooding her voice. Water droplets drummed at the outside of the coach. It sounded eerily like fingers tapping on the windows. "We should have never went through here," Turk gasped, breathless. "Damn it, I knew we should have went around." "What's the meaning of this?" Tom asked, sounding more annoyed than concerned. Turk clutched at the man's expensive coat, twisting the fabric in his calloused hands. "You don't get it. It's all true. But your wife knows." "Know what? What is true?" "Turk, you're raving like a lunatic," Cheryl said, indignant and afraid all at once. "The ab-origins were right," Turk hissed. "The mountain spirit, they call it. The shadow." "Shadow? Have you hit your head or something?" Tom was raising his voice now, suddenly furious. "We should have taken the train. You and your talk of nature, Cheryl. Now we're in bed with a madman." Turk seemed to not be hearing them. "If only we had fire," he muttered. "A fire, but this damn rain, and your voices out in the woods." He shuddered. Cheryl was sobbing now, visibly shaken, and Tom placed his hand on her elbow before berating him. "You're speaking insanity right now, and you need to stop upsetting my wife. Now I'd appreciate it if you kept quiet and calmed down." Turk looked over both of them, his eyes wide and red-rimmed. You don't believe me, but I saw it the other night when we were traveling all night. I saw it following us, and you'll see it too soon enough." With that, he took up his rifle and opened the door and stepped out into the rain, which was now pouring down with all the fury of a hurricane. His form soon disappeared from sight completely in that limited visibility. "Where?" Cheryl whispered. "What was he going on about? Honey? What was he talking about?" "It's nothing, Cher," Tom reassured her, closing the stage door. "He talked to me earlier about some stories he'd supposedly heard about these mountains. I thought he sounded like a whack job even then. In the morning this will seem ridiculous, and soon as we reach the next town, we'll buy a train ticket or find someone else to drive us west. Okay, honey?" She looked up at him, tears brimming her eyes. "I don't know. I haven't felt right since we got out here." "Cher?" Tom began, but was cut short by the crack of a rifle outside, followed by a blood-curdling scream. Cheryl immediately opened the door and hopped outside, all of a sudden oblivious to the weather and her own expensive garb. Tom called out after her, but she didn't so much as turn back, and with a sigh he followed her out into the torrent. "Mr. Turk?" she yelled at the top of her lungs. "Mr. Turk!" "Cheryl," Tom warned. He was feeling uneasy now. There was something about that scream that made his blood freeze in place. "Turk?" she hollered. "Turk, please come here. We're sorry about what happened. Please come back." In the woodline, a branch snapped. Then Turk's voice rang out. "It's all right," he said. "It was just a bear. I'm all right." Cheryl sighed with relief. Tom could see the tension leave her body in one great rush. Yet there was something wrong with that voice. It rang out much too clearly. When she had been calling, her voice had been muted by the storm, even though she was yelling as loud as she could. Yet Turk's voice carried as if they were all enclosed in a room together. He saw his wife start moving towards the speaker, and his heart caught in his throat, and before he could stop her, some shape, incomprehensible and terrible and yet absolute in its creation, some fevered dream or denizen of the realm where gods had once ruled, but no more, and with no mouth and no eyes, and yet 100 mouths and 100 eyes all at the same time, some being too grotesque to be possible, appeared from the darkness with skin that glossed black in the rain, and it reached, not with an arm or a tentacle, but somehow it just reached. And Tom heard his wife's greeting morph into a scream, and he saw her skin tighten in places as if invisible ropes were being drawn around her, and then it just burst. Even in the gloom, her blood was visible, and it spilled into the grass and was gone, and her head seemed to lift on her shoulders, until somehow it was no longer attached to them. And then he was running through the sepulchre of slain trees that he knew now were no victim of lightning, but instead a fate altogether more terrible. In those moments, his mind understood a great deal. A million flashing lights behind his eyes, and he felt on the brink of some discovery. And then it was gone, and his mind snapped in two like a twig. And that's when he felt the thing, the shadow, tighten around his waist, and then there was nothing. Nothing save for the torrential rain and the ceaseless howling of the wind.